you so much for such an informative and heartfelt panel. I now welcome the second panel, Studies on Women in the Law, Justice Moberly and Julie Manning Magid. Thank you.
I should make two clarifications. One, I didn't just get appointed to something new. I'm Chief Judge of the United States Bankruptcy Court. I am. Oh, thank you, Loretta. And I have the small role, but the great pleasure of introducing Julie Manning Magid to you today. Professor Magid is a professor of business law and a Kelley Venture Fellow in the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University. She's also the executive and academic director of the Randall L. Tobias Center for Excellence or Leadership Excellence at Indiana University. She received her JD from the University of Michigan Law School and her AB from Georgetown University. Professor Magid is the author of numerous scholarly articles and book chapters focused on public policy related to healthcare, gender, innovation, and privacy. Despite the highly intellectual content of her articles, she displays humor many times with the titles to her articles, such as Pregnant with Possibility, Reexamining the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, and Pregnancy Discrimination, Laboring Under Assumptions in the Workplace. She has published this research in journals including the American Business Law Journal, North Carolina Law Review, and the University of Pennsylvania Business Law Journal. She is also a textbook co-author of The Legal and Regulatory Environment of Business and editor-in-chief of the American Business Law Journal. Professor Magid is recognized for her teaching in the undergraduate, graduate, specialized graduate, and online teaching environments with numerous teaching awards, including the Kelley School of Business MBA Teaching Excellence Award and the Schuyler F. Otteson Undergraduate Teaching Excellence Award. Her teaching has received international recognition from the Academy of Legal Studies and Business as the overall winner of the Charles M. Hewitt Master Teacher Award. In addition to her extensive and impressive personal resume, Professor Magid is also a wife. In fact, her husband's job is what brought her here, she told me, and she's the mother of 3 boys and has contributed significantly to our community through her service in many different capacities to the Women's Fund of Central Indiana, as a board member of the Orchard School, a member of the Gathering, which is an organization of women leaders in our community, a contributor to the community plan of the Domestic Violence Coalition, among many other community activities. I know we're all anxious to hear about the recent studies about women in our profession, so let me introduce Professor Magid.
Thank you so much, Chief Judge Moberly. I keep telling people I think there was a mistake made and I should introduce the Chief Judge so she can talk about all of her accomplishments, but it is my honor to be able to present to this group today. Thank you to the sponsors for including me. I have a very short amount of time and a lot to cover, so I will talk fast. But I want to leave you with 3 major points. I'm going to make them at the outset. The first is diversity in organizations results in better decision-making and produces more resilient organizations. Diversity in organizations results in better decision-making and produces more resilient organizations. Secondly, there is a problem with the role of women in our legal profession, in the courtrooms, in the law firms, and other areas. Third and lastly, there are measures to take that promote an inclusive environment that can be measured, evaluated, and continued. We'll talk more about that later. Because my charge is to talk about recent studies, I want at the outset to talk about a few of the studies that I've reviewed for this presentation and let you know that I have just a quick reference guide that you will receive after my talk, along with my contact information if you want to know more in a less fast tone, then I'm happy to talk further with you or your organizations later. But the report of the New York State Bar Association from November 2017, I will reference. The ABA Commission in Women in Profession Minority Corporate Counsel Association report that came in October 2018. And I also have relied on an unpublished manuscript that focuses on Hoosier women in the law, has reviewed a lot of these other more national studies, has done some original research. I'll point to the result in a moment. But it is written by Sloan Crawford, and Sloan is with us today. I'd like her to stand and be acknowledged. Sloan. Sloan is a second year here at the McKinney School. She'll be at Ice Miller this summer. She's doing wonderful work. Look for the published manuscript to come out and keep in contact with her because she's doing good work in this area. I also would like to thank Professor Jennifer Drobeck, who is at McKinney School here, who connected me with Sloan. So those research points will come particularly when I make point 2 and 3, but I want to get started on my first point, and it is that you need your elevator pitch about diversity that you should use all the time, no matter what elevator you're in. You get in an elevator, you might be with a colleague, you might be with a friend, you might be with someone from the coffee shop, a complete stranger, a client, doesn't matter, you're in an elevator. And this is what you say. Ready? Diversity in organizations. Well, let's start out more nice. Let's say, don't you find it interesting, those research studies that say diversity in organizations produces better decision-making and more resilient organizations? That's your 60 seconds. If you time me, I'm under. And whoever's in the elevator with you is going to say something like, and that means they want to know more. So then what you're going to follow that up is the research. And this research comes primarily from the work that I've done around women on corporate boards and women in senior leadership of business organizations. I think there's an opportunity for some of the research in the legal field and the business field to speak together and learn more. But what you follow up the with is, there's this thing about in-group affinity, and it's very strong in human beings. So if you're a human being, you care and associate closely with people who are like you. It's how we're created. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a fact. That means the same race, the same gender, the things such as age, speaking patterns, how you dress. We know people who are in our in-group, and we closely bond to them quickly. Now, what happens when you closely bond to people in-group and you have decision-making requirements? The communication studies have shown us that people in your in-group, you tend to shortcut the communication. You have norms that you rely on and assumptions that you rely on so that you start communicating in a shortened form. People who are in the decision-making group who are aspirational to that in-group will play along because they want to be involved in the in-group. People who are on the outside of the in-group will either play along because it's difficult to be out of the group, or will be ignored by the in-group because they've got their thing going on. There is a tipping point where the groups become diverse enough when you're making decisions that it slows down the process. Now, a lot of research has said the number three outside people is the tipping point that changes it. I tend not to love quantifying it that way because it depends on how strong the affinity is among other members of the group. It depends on how big the group is. There's a lot of variables there. But let's just say it's more than one or two or a couple. But when you reach this tipping point, it slows down. The decision-making slows down. And you're thinking, shoot, things are going to go too slow. No, that's a good thing. And that's what you need to convince people on your elevator speech, that it's a good thing when decision-making is slowing. And again, the communication research and other research around decision-making has found that diverse groups making decisions work harder to create the decision. They work harder at preparing in advance and in creating consensus. They take longer. They achieve consensus. They are more thorough and complete in the decision that they reach. And those decisions tend to withstand scrutiny from outside because every member of the group understands exactly the process that went through in getting to the decision and why the decision was built that way and can speak to it. Those decisions produce more resilient organizations because when outside forces question decisions or the way that the group interacts, there is a strength behind the process that occurred. So organizations of this type are better when challenged and the decision makers are stronger. Now, one of the areas I think it's really interesting to think about this is in ADR. Although I will tell you in a few moments the statistics on women in court, I will tell you that it's much lower for female neutrals on arbitration panels. It's about 15 to 20%. And in large, complex cases, particularly those over $1 billion, it's about 4% female neutrals on arbitration panels. Now think about the consequences of having a less diverse group make really hard, complex decisions. We want diversity because we want those decisions to be more thorough and prepared for and considered and to have resulted in a more complete decision. So I find it interesting how it works in that arena. To the second point, there is a problem with women and people of color advancing in the legal profession generally. We have had almost 30 years of gender parity in law schools and in entry-level positions in legal field. This has not moved the numbers significantly in any way. We are not talking about a pipeline problem, and we're not talking about market forces. And I find it interesting that studies that I've reviewed are still sort of relying on pipeline language, despite the fact that it's clear it's not that problem. There is good news. So let me start with the good news. Panels like we just saw, they make a difference to see women in these roles. The New York State Bar Association report saw a higher rate of participation in the state's courts than in the federal courts and attributed it to the majority of female judges for more than 10 years in those courts and 2 back-to-back female chief judges. Overall, the number is about 20 to 25% of women appearing in courts, but that number percentage is masked a little bit by the fact that women represent public sector clients at a much higher rate than private sector clients. Sloan's research that she's done shows that there might be a little better situation in our state, that women appeared about 30% of the attorneys who spoke in the Indiana State Supreme Court during the period of her research. Courts, including those in Indiana, have taken important steps in encouraging junior lawyers to argue motions in court and provide standing orders that they will hold a hearing if a junior lawyer is going to argue the motion. So judges are making a difference in hearing more women's voices in the courtroom. I think there's some great research that could be done around who all are doing those standing orders. It is important that our civic and legal institutions reflect our community. It gives credibility to the jurors, to the plaintiffs and defendants, to the witnesses, and the community larger. And I think that credibility about legal institutions is particularly important right now, and the diversity of our community says that. But still, and I'm going to very quickly go through a list here, there are some signs that there is a problem. About 20% of all equity partners, again, just depending on what area they're studying, are women. That's less than a 2% increase over a decade. There was a survey at 250 largest firms in the country. Only five firms, not 5%, 5 firms had 25% or more female equity partners. There's a legal recruiting firm that specialized in recruiting partners, lateral hires, that did a survey. They averaged that on 44% higher wages for male equity partners than women, 44%, I said. There is clear across all the surveys that there is a wage gap at every level, even controlling for every reason that people typically give for these wage disparities, whether it is time off for children or billable hours or origination, et cetera. There is a wage gap. Females are segregated by practice. Women are in education, family law, healthcare, immigration, and labor and employment. You see the least number of women in banking, corporate law, and litigation practices. We already heard Chief Judge refer to females are interrupted more in court, including if you're on the US Supreme Court. That seems unbelievable to me. Being assertive and self-promoting is part of being successful in the legal field. But women face a really different bind when it comes to this requirement, because if you're too assertive, you're aggressive. If you're not assertive enough, you get feedback from colleagues that you lack confidence. Women in our general are credited with less billings than their male counterparts. The origination credits are not distributed to women equally. I could go on. Again, I'll give you references to the studies following this afternoon. But I want to end on there are steps to take that promote an inclusive environment that must be measured, evaluated, and continued. I want to really focus on that continued part and refer back to my in-group affinity discussion at the top. There is no finish line here, people. We are not going to get to the end and smoke a victory cigar. Bad for you to do anyway, but it's just not going to happen. There are thousands of years of human interaction that leave us to in-group norms, and that we have to continuously work for inclusion and the benefits that it has for better decision-making and more resilient organizations. The focus must be on efforts to keep this moving, and I will touch on just the two panels that follow me. I think we'll probably have terrific examples and more, and we've already seen examples in our previous panel. When you heard the Chief Judges talking about how somebody said, I'm going to make this my project when they expressed an interest in the court, or I'm having people over and saying, this is what you need to do next, run for something, try to get on courts. That's what's known as sponsorship. We talk a lot about mentors. Mentors are great, but sponsorship is intentional and can be measured. In a law firm, if you have a junior lawyer has a lot of work with a single partner, you can measure how much that partner sponsors the junior lawyer. How many doors are open? How many times are they asked to speak in court? How many times are they introduced to new people or important clients? That's measurable, and it could be reported regularly to promotion committees. And if a junior lawyer is not being sponsored by someone with whom they do a lot of work, they need to know that, and they need to have the opportunity to work with somebody else. The tone at the top matters for all organizations, but certainly in this regard. Firm governance committees cannot leave diversity and inclusion to people who are part of the in-group. It's great to see a few male faces out here, but this is a conversation that needs to be had with everyone and not talking to each other about this all the time. I think that it would be really interesting to have diverse decision-making around billable hours and how that adversely affects women in a law firm. I also was really thrilled to hear the Chief Judge's talk earlier about their experience with having children and being in the law field. I think that we need more discussion about how to handle leave. My research is in pregnancy discrimination, and I am continually befuddled by the idea that a birth parent, with all the medical things that happen associated with parenting, is treated the same as a non-birth parent. I don't understand how those two things are equal. Inclusive practices are ongoing positive behaviors, and I think that's what we have to realize. We don't exercise for 1 week and think that we're going to stay in shape for the rest of the year. We don't finish reading at the end of law school and think we're going to be well-informed lawyers for the rest of our practice. Similarly, you don't stop working on inclusion and think it's going to continue to just take place. It's ongoing, but it can be measured and evaluated and make a positive difference for organizations and individuals. And the better organizations, particularly when it comes to the legal field, means that we are better at producing justice, fairness, and strong legal institutions. And I think that's a worthwhile goal. Thank you so much for having me today.